So talk to me about, and very few people, I've mentioned this to a couple of people and they look at me quite blankly, so hopefully you won't. um, Cannabis and creativity. So yes, when I teach about cannabis, I will say certain cannabinoids are known to, have the potential to stimulate creativity. And no one's ever said to me, explain that, dive into that a bit deeper. They care about the physical attributes. Now that probably says a lot about the fact that they've come to a scientific person to learn from. So they may not be as concerned about the psychological elements of the plant. But how aware have you been over the years about cannabis having that ability to open your mind in a way that no other plant can? Maybe mushrooms, or more so mushrooms, but let's just stick with cannabis for a minute. How
Mhm.
aware of that have you been?
I cannot say I know about this, but I'll try.
Very good.
I rehearsed that before.
That's really good. Lots of people try to do that accent and they just can't get it.
Uh, yes. Well, I think the first thing to know about smoking marijuana is that it can be used productively and it can be used destructively. There's no question about that. Addiction to anything, whether it's food, whether it's entertainment, whether it's using a device, whether it's some mind-altering substance, can be destructive. And if these days that learning is really not happening, it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but everything, it just goes that way. What I've discovered is the exploration, the development of stronger strains of marijuana is not is not as positive as it's put forth to be. First of all, the social dynamic of passing a joint around is no longer available, because after you take one or two hits, you can't pass anything around because the weed is so strong. And so the social dynamic has been eliminated so much from marijuana. I think if the social dynamic were eliminated from alcohol, that would be very, very considerable, because people like to get together over alcohol. And we even have a term called solo drinker, or whatever that, solitude drinker, or something like that. That's a derogatory term. But we don't have that understanding about marijuana, that something has been lost in the strength of marijuana. Something else has been lost in that everything that we get, that we apply to ourselves, that alters us, whether it's the stronger ones like LSD and mushrooms and psilocybin, or marijuana in its stronger form. Everything stronger uh, allows us to call for less from ourselves. The more we get from outside, the less we demand from ourselves. So that there is something not positive about this. So I say sometime, if the goal of marijuana or any mind altering system is that you should be able to get to a point. Now, I know this is a podcast, so you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing, but you'll hear what I'm doing. Is if you can put your two fingers together in front of your mouth with nothing in your two fingers and go and hold your breath for a second and then let it out and feel the amazingness of that. That should be the goal of any mind altering substance. And that demands a lot from the individual. So I have noticed that aside from the details of what mind altering substances can release, which is extraordinary, there are downsides, and those downsides should be recognized. Now, talking about the upsides, I think that there are closed parts of our thinking and feeling process, as well as our moving process, that are not going to be released. They are just not going to be released by our ordinary actions. Now, if our growing up and our programming and our development had been different, that might not be the case. It could be that it's not the case for people that Margaret Mead studied in the Trobriand Islands. It could be the case for them. They would, of course, have other issues, but for us, the idea of opening up is very beautiful words, but where do you start? And we need something to crack open. And it really, it's a harsh word, but it really is needed because everything is crack closed. And so cracking open seems to be what's required. And I recommend that. I recommend mind-altering substance for the cracking open. But I also recommend them for only the forevision of what's possible, not for the perpetuation of the dependency on the cracking open process. But I do have tremendous value and have used those substances. I don't use them anymore, but I have used those substances for the purposes of that cracking open. And maybe somebody doesn't need them, but I can tell you that there would be no way that I would have the state of being that I have now, or the understanding I have now, or the capacity I have now, had I not had that assistance in cracking open.